Edward III owned England. Every road, every castle, every coin with his face stamped on it. And in 1345, he couldn't pay his bills. Not cash was tight, could not pay. He owed Italian bankers more money than his kingdom produced in a decade. So he did the only thing a king could do. He said no. And two of the largest banks in Europe died. This isn't a story about one bad king. It's the pattern. Philip II of Spain ruled an empire where the sun never set, had silver arriving by the fleet, and went bankrupt 4 separate times. The kings of France borrowed so hard their own country eventually guillotined them. So how does the man who controls the mint go broke? The answer explains something deeply uncomfortable about the country you're living in right now. In 1337, Edward III claimed the throne of France. Bold. Also expensive, because a claim like that has to be backed by an army. Here's the math that breaks people's brains. The English crown's ordinary annual revenue at the time ran in the tens of thousands of pounds. Edward's war would cost hundreds of thousands. He wasn't short by a little. He was short by an order of magnitude. He couldn't tax his way there. Extraordinary taxes needed Parliament's approval, and Parliament was already getting difficult. He couldn't mint his way there either, and in 60 seconds you'll understand exactly why. So he went to Florence. The Bardi and the Peruzzi were the closest thing the 14th century had to Wall Street. They banked popes. They ran branches from London to Cyprus. They handed Edward the money and took contracts, interest, and rights over English wool exports as collateral. Then Edward simply stopped paying. Within a few years, both houses had collapsed. Historians still argue over how much was Edward and how much was a wider Italian banking panic. But every lender in Europe drew the same conclusion. Lending to a king isn't the safe trade. It's the dangerous one. Because of one sentence that governs this entire video, you cannot sue a king in his own courts. He is the court. We assume monarchs could conjure cash out of nothing. They couldn't, and the reason is physical. Medieval money wasn't a promise, it was metal. A silver penny had value because it contained silver. The king didn't create that value, he certified it. His face on the coin was a guarantee. This disc weighs what I say it weighs, which means the royal mint could only produce as much money as there was bullion physically flowing into the kingdom. No mines, no trade surplus, no money. And England was not sitting on mountains of silver. It was importing metal through the wool trade and hoping. So the printing press wasn't just unavailable to a medieval king. It didn't exist as an idea. Now the other side of the ledger. Kings weren't broke because they were stupid. They were broke because the job was designed to bankrupt you. Armies first. Medieval war wasn't a battle. It was a logistics nightmare. Wages, horses, ships, siege engines, and food for thousands of men who eat every single day in a foreign country for years. Then fortification. A single major castle could swallow several years of royal income. Edward I's castle-building campaign in Wales nearly emptied the treasury by itself. Then the court, and this is the part everyone misreads as vanity, the feasts, the gifts, the jewels, the processions. That wasn't ego, that was infrastructure. A king's authority ran entirely on belief. Nobles obeyed a monarch who looked unstoppable and generous. A monarch who looked poor looked weak. And a monarch who looked weak got replaced, usually violently, usually by a relative. So kings had a spending floor they could not drop below without dying. Sit with that. Their survival required them to overspend. If royal debt was this toxic, why line up to fund it? Because the upside was enormous. You didn't just earn interest, which the church technically banned, so it got disguised as fees and exchange rates. You earned access, monopolies, customs revenue, tax collection rights, titles. A banker who financed a king could end up owning an entire industry. The bet was simple. He's the most powerful man alive. Of course he's good for it. The flaw was equally simple. The most powerful man alive is precisely the person who can refuse to pay you and face zero consequences. England's Jewish community learned this in the worst possible way. Barred from most trades and pushed into money lending, they were taxed toward ruin by successive kings, and when there was nothing left to extract, Edward I expelled them in 1290 and seized the debts owed to them. The crown didn't just default, it confiscated the loan book. Here's the thing though, default cost a king nothing legally and everything financially, because the next lender knew and priced it in. Rates on royal loans could climb to 20, 30, 40% once you had a history. Some lenders demanded physical security. Edward III pawned the crown jewels in the Low Countries and left members of his own household behind as human collateral. That's the trap. Default, credit gets expensive. You borrow anyway because the war is happening now. More of every future pound goes to servicing old debt. Less is left to actually run the state, so you borrow again. Philip II of Spain hit this at maximum scale. Silver from Potosi arriving by the ton, the largest income of any ruler in Europe. And he still suspended payments in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. The money was real, it just arrived slower than the interest. So kings found a shortcut. If you can't get more silver, make the silver stretch. Recall the coins, melt them down, mix in copper, strike more coins from the same bullion. You've created money out of nothing. Henry VIII ran this harder than anyone. During the Great Debasement, English coin fineness fell from around 92% silver to as low as 25%. His nickname says everything, Old Copper Nose. Because the thin silver wore off the highest point of the coin first, his nose, and the copper showed through. Short term, it was fantastic. It paid for his French wars. Medium term, it was carnage. Prices surged. Foreign merchants discounted English money. Real wages fell for decades. And notice who actually paid. Not the crown, the wage earner, holding coins that quietly stopped buying bread. Debasement is a tax that requires nobody's consent, which is exactly why kings loved it. Elizabeth I finally reversed it in 1560 and 61, calling in the bad coin and reissuing at honest fineness. It worked. It also proved the point. The fix required a ruler willing to eat short-term pain, which is the one thing the system selects against. A few got out, not by finding treasure, by building institutions. The pattern is always the same. Stop treating revenue as the king's personal purse and start building a state that collects reliably, with consent. William the Conqueror ordered the Doomsday Book, a survey of who owned what, so it could actually be assessed. Henry II built a professional exchequer and royal courts. And later, English monarchs made the trade that changed everything. Parliament approves the taxes, and in return, Parliament gets a say. That looks like a defeat for the crown. It was the greatest financial upgrade in European history. Because a king borrowing on his own name borrows at the rate of a man who might be dead next spring. A king borrowing on Parliament's guarantee borrows at the rate of an institution. When Britain formalized this with the Bank of England in 1694, it began borrowing at rates France simply could not match, and outspent a country with 3 times its population for the next 100 years. France never made that trade. By 1788, roughly half of all French government revenue was going to service debt. The king summoned the Estates General to fix his finances. That meeting ended the monarchy. And here's why this isn't just history. Every mechanism is still running. Governments still spend more than they collect. Bond markets still price trust. That's why one country borrows at 2% and another borrows at 15% for the exact same money. Currency debasement still happens. It's just called monetary expansion now. And the wage earner still absorbs it. And sovereign default is still the one contract nobody can truly enforce, because there is still no court above a state. The king's real problem was never a shortage of money. He controlled the mint. His problem was that money is a claim on other people's belief. And belief is the one asset a crown cannot manufacture. Edward III could stamp his face on every coin in England. He just couldn't make the Florentines believe him twice. If you want the sequel, the bank that financed kings for 2 centuries and then lost everything in a single week, it's on the screen now. Subscribe, because this channel is where money stops being boring and starts being the reason empires fell.